I gotta ask, if Donald Trump has all this money, all this liquid cash, or quote unquote cash, whatever that means, why would he seek the help of a bond company who he then has to pay an additional fee to? I think it's like somewhere between with 3 and 5%. I mean, that is a massive amount when you're dealing with a sum of $175 million. So if he has the cash liquid right there, why wouldn't he just put his own cash up and not have to pay extra money to some random company?
It makes absolutely no sense, because if you're required to put up $175 million in cash, which you could just deposit in the court's escrow account, he
Right.
did that in the first E. Jean Carroll case. He deposited $5.5 million in cash in the court's escrow account, which let him appeal the first E. Jean Carroll verdict. So if you had 175 million, you just give it to the court, and you don't incur the massive fees that are required when you go to a surety company, when you go to a bondsman, because they're going to request a premium in order to issue that bond. So what does that tell me, Brian? It says that he doesn't have $175 million in cash.
Yeah, that must be what those air quotes mean. Okay, Glenn, so what are next steps here? When are we going to get a
Wow, this is really complicated. I can't imagine why, if Donald Trump had $175 million, why wouldn't he just pay and avoid the extra fees? I mean, it seems like he actually doesn't have that money, and he's just being a fraud yet again, pretending he has money that he doesn't have. Well, or maybe if we think a little bit deeper, we can figure out why he wouldn't want to give up $175 million. And I don't think it's even that complicated. It's not that hard to figure out, unless, of course, you're in a bubble, not unlike how a lot of the right wing is in a bubble. The liberal media folks are in their own bubble. So I will explain very likely why these two gentlemen are so confused and this is so difficult for them to figure out. It's because they are so biased, and they sort of they start with their conclusion and sort of work backwards from it. So they look at Trump as a buffoon, and he is. They look at him as a fraud, and he is. They look at him as a guy who pretends to be more wealthy than he actually is, and that's also correct. But they're taking these details, which are not necessarily directly related to the current situation, and they're coming to a conclusion. So the assumption is Trump is always talking about he's got all this money, he doesn't have that much money. So then a scenario comes up where, he's doing his bond, and then it's like your confirmation bias. You're like, I know why, because he doesn't actually have the money, because he's broke, and he doesn't, he's such a fraud, such a fake, right? So there isn't much of a thought process, right? I really don't think Bryan or this other guy spent much time actually thinking about why he might do that, because I think Bryan is a pretty smart guy, and if he actually took some time and thought about it, he could probably come up with the same thing that I came up with, and I come up with it pretty quickly. I didn't have to think deeply about it. I wonder why. It was pretty much obvious to me. Not because I'm smarter than Bryan or have some kind of special information, but again, I'm actually thinking about it. I don't just look at. So the interesting thing is, I probably agree with Bryan in terms of Bryan, his assessment of Donald Trump, his character, what he's all about, probably matches or is very similar to my assessment of Donald Trump. But however, I don't start with that conclusion. Donald Trump's a fraud, and then work backwards from it. Bryan seems to be doing that, right? What I do is, even though I look at him as a buffoon, I look at him as always talking about he has more money than he probably does, I still evaluate every situation individually, looking at the facts, right? And then I make an assessment based on those facts. If it happens to match my preconceived notions of Trump, then so be it. If it doesn't, so be it, right? But I'm not going from what I assume Trump is, and what I think he would most likely be doing. I don't start there. I start with the details. So what are the details? I believe Trump talks about his wealth being much more than it is, and I think I did a video talking about this. I would guess, based on everything we know about Trump, how he operates business, and the businesses that he does have, how he makes money, I would presume, I think that he probably has, anywhere from $100 million to maybe $300 million cash, right? Not net worth, it's actual cash. That to me is my logical assessment in terms of what kind of money I think he actually has, right? Now, with that being said, the first thing that comes to mind is that the amount of money that he probably has is pretty close to the amount of money that he would have to put up, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? When you talk about $175 million and he might only have 100 or 200 million, right? This is really close to the number. So I leap directly from that instantly to the realization of, okay, so basically you're talking about him giving up an overwhelming majority of his cash, potentially all of his cash, right? Now, that right away is ringing alarm bells because, the idea of giving up, an overwhelming majority of your cash, I mean, for anyone is kind of crazy. Like, that's a thing that people don't want to do. You don't want to give up all your cash, right? So in general, just on the surface, that's kind of like a whoa, right? Someone wouldn't want to do that. But it gets even deeper if you actually spend some time thinking about it rather than just using your preconceived notions, right? Donald Trump is in the middle of a whole bunch of legal cases, right? There's a lot of expenses involved in, his legal expenses. And also, he's losing stuff, right? So he gets judgments against him. So he owes people millions of dollars as a result, right? And more of that is potentially coming. So he's got a lot, he's got a piling up of debt, right? And a lot of this debt, like much debt really requires cash, right? Like my mortgage. I can't use my credit card to pay my mortgage, right? I have to pay cash. So I need to always make sure I have enough cash to pay my mortgage, because if I run out of cash, if it's lower than what the mortgage requires, then I can't pay my mortgage. That's a big problem, right? So I need to have a certain amount of cash available. I'm not going to give up a majority of my cash. That is a big problem because, again, I have big things that require cash, right? So that's just on a very basic level, just for average person or just anybody, right? But then again, we added up specifically to Trump. He's got legal expenses, he's got judgments against him coming, and then additionally to that, he's in the middle of a campaign, and not just a campaign. If he loses, the risk of him going to prison, gets much higher, right? So he's kind of in a fight for his life, trying to avoid prison. I don't know why he's running for president again. I can't say that that's the only reason that he's running, but I can certainly say that very, very likely that is a big motivation for him, because, I mean, if he wins, he can pardon himself on a bunch of stuff, and that stuff goes away. If he doesn't win, then all the risks that are there now would remain. And, it's a lot of bad stuff, right? So even though I'm pessimistic about him really getting sent to prison or whatever, if I were him, I wouldn't bet on that, right? I can easily say whatever I want because I'm not the one who's potentially going to prison. But if it was me, if I were Trump, I would not be saying, "Oh, the government's so corrupt. They're probably not even gonna lock me up. They're gonna give me house arrest, or they're just gonna fine me." I wouldn't be thinking like that, right? Because the risk of me being wrong is too great. So I know he's very motivated to win the election. So he needs money for campaigning, right? He's in the middle of an election, very expensive election. The Democrats have been outraising the Republicans. The idea of him giving up a majority of his cash at a time like this, when he has mounting debt, all these judgments against him, more judgments potentially coming. He's trying to run for president. If he loses, he might go to prison potentially. So there's so many very obvious reasons why he might not want to give up the cash, right? Did Bryan spend much time at all thinking about these things? Did he really think it through? Or did he already, the minute he looked at it like, oh, Trump is doing some bond thing, he's like, look at this guy, he's fake, he's a fraud. And that's the whole thing. I don't think Bryan is wrong about what he thinks about Trump. But, he's just sort of lost in his analysis of the situation because I don't think he's really thinking about it. He's just going based on his feelings. I don't like Trump. I think Trump is a fraud, blah, 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 blah. So obviously the explanation for this has to be based on one of those things, right? That's the effect of the echo chamber, right? This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.